Welcome to this keynote panel for the Keep It 100 virtual teach-in. We at Moms Rising, Mamas con Poder, are thrilled to be with you all to talk policy and to move change together. Kick us off, and then we'll have a moderated conversation with Moms Rising luminary leaders about specific, big, transformational, much-needed changes that are moving right now, and also about how together we are a powerful, unstoppable force, along with sharing tactics on how we can each leverage change in the fastest way possible. Because big, transformational changes are needed. Motherhood in America was at a breaking point even before the pandemic. Then COVID-19 struck. A full 32% of women aged 25 to 44 were pushed out of jobs simply because they didn't have access to childcare. Black, Indigenous, and women and moms of color experienced the most devastating economic and health harms. To put this in perspective, women were half of our entire paid labor force at the start of this pandemic. Now, job rates for women have plummeted to 1988 levels, with women losing 1 million than men, and women of color disproportionately experiencing job losses. These much-needed jobs. Women in the U.S. are key earners in the majority of families. The data is in. The pandemic has had an outsized impact on women and moms of color have experienced a compounded health and economic harm. We have foundational work to do together, and we're going to dive right into this foundational work right now. So now we're going to move to the luminaries at Moms Rising who will be sharing all of the things with you today. I want to start out asking each luminary leader to please introduce yourself, share your name, pronouns, where you're joining from, and which campaign areas you're leading right now. I'll start out with me. I'm Kristen Rauch-Finkbeiner, Executive Director of Moms Rising, she, her, and hers, and I'm going to turn it right to Beatrice Beckford. Welcome.
Thank you, Kristen. My name is Beatrice Beckford. I'm National Director of Youth and Family Justice at Moms Rising. I go by she and her pronouns. I'm joining you from Chicago.
Now, next up, we have Ruth Martin.
Hi, my name is Ruth Martin. I also use she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you from Maryland, Silver Spring, right outside the Beltway, and I lead our workplace justice programs.
Now with Tina Sherman.
Hi, thanks, Kristen. I'm Tina Sherman, Senior Campaign Director for Maternal Justice. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am based in North Carolina.
Next up, we have Donna Norton.
Hi, I'm Donna Norton, Executive Vice President of Moms Rising. I use she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you from California, and I'm going to be talking about immigration today.
Next up, we have Alyssa Schmier.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Schmier. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Detroit, Michigan, and I lead on our national budget and tax work.
Thank you so much to everyone for being here. Thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you to everyone who's leading. We are at a unique time in history where a door for big change is opening and where we've had multiple national reckonings. So I want to ask each person on our panel, what in your policy area is giving you hope? What's enlivening you that people rising across the nation can bring real transformative change in our country? Let's start out with Alyssa. Alyssa, what's bringing you hope?
So believe it or not, taxes is bringing me hope. And that tax day is coming up. And the reason why this tax day is way more hopeful and probably less depressing and stressful than in years past is because we had a major historic win just a couple of months ago with the American Rescue Plan. And we were able to pass a giant expansion of the child tax credit. And so everyone that files their taxes this year, starting in July, they'll be able to get monthly payments with a ton of money for their kids, including people who don't normally file taxes or make very little income. And it's a lot of money. I mean, it's not a little bit of money. It's $3,000 for children 6 to 17 and $3,600 for children under the age of 5. And that, is per child per year, and we'll be able to get those paid out monthly. So that's really inspiring me because I know how many families out there that's going to make a huge difference for. In fact, just that alone is going to cut poverty in half over the next year. And so I'm really inspired by that and encouraged to build upon that success.
I love that you raised a success because our next luminary leader just had a success this week. Tina Sherman, can you share the news and also share what's bringing you hope?
Yes, thank you so much, Kristen. This week, actually just yesterday, the first piece of legislation in the Momnibus, the Black Maternal Health Momnibus, Protecting Veterans Act passed the House. We are incredibly excited about that. This is going to help ensure that veterans and the unique needs that women veterans face in regards to maternal health addressed. We are incredibly excited about that being the first bill of the Black Maternal Health Momnibus passed the House, and now it's onward to the Senate. And what I'm most hopeful about coming into well, I guess in the midst of 2021, is that we in the new White House have a Black woman to lift up the voices of other Black women and to talk about the maternal health crisis and really center the voices of Black women. It's really bringing me a lot of hope this year.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have Donna with the hope question. What's bringing you hope and what's enlivening you right now?
Well, what's bringing me hope is that, despite the incredible anti-immigrant rhetoric of the last 4 years, there's actually some of the highest support for immigrants right now. For example, a recent survey said there's 72% of the public that supports passing the DREAM Act. And I think that's really one of the kind of good outcomes of COVID is that people really realized how central immigrants are in our economy and, kept our farms and our stores open and healthcare systems running. And I think that's a really great thing. And also, I have to say that the young people, all the incredible young immigrant advocates who have done so much during this 4 years, during such a time of incredible adversity and threats, have really also lifted this issue and are super inspirational to me. And, it's a great thing that for most Americans, it's really not a debate anymore, that, more and more people are just realizing that undocumented immigrants need to be recognized as the Americans they already are. And we have a big opportunity in the coming months to finally, after decades, create a real pathway to citizenship for folks. So I'm super excited and inspired by that.
Thank you. Next up, we have Beatrice Beckford. What's enlivening you in your hope in your work?
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I think similarly to the points that Donna lifted up, in much of our work around decriminalizing motherhood and families, so much of what Black communities, Latinx communities, low-income and working poor communities have been lifting up for generations around the deep divestment in their communities and the things that their communities need, and in overinvestment in things like policing and lead to mass incarceration has really shifted. So there's a lot of narrative being shifted around the role that police play in our lives, the role that they play in the lives of our children. And the root of that conversation is really being situated in what our communities need to thrive, what our kids need to thrive within the school building. So some of what's bringing me most of the inspiration that I'm getting these days in those conversations is that it's really being led by young people, by parents, caregivers, educators, and folks who have been harmed closest by the issue, but are also leading much of the strategizing to address criminalizing in our communities. And to do so by centering the things that we need and the things that will help us thrive as full people in communities that deserve to breathe and live and have good quality of life. And so I'm being inspired by the young people and the parents and educators who are driving this conversation and narrative in our communities, that this conversation has been amplified at the national and arguably the global level about the role that we're think that police play in our lives and the overdependence on policing, both with respect to financial resources and on things that other professionals are more qualified to address. And that there are so many incredible and dynamic that people are starting to consider and research and strategize in their own communities that really do take us away from depending on police officers and cops, and actually center care and what communities need. So I'm very, very excited about the shifting in the conversation about policing, the shift in the conversation about criminalizing and how it exists in our communities and has existed for so long, and that the voices of communities that have been impacted by this have for too long been silenced, for leading much of the dialogue and narrative around the solutions to get us out of that. And so that's deeply inspiring to me, and I'm excited to talk about that in this panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have Ruth Martin. What's bringing you hope?
I'm going to build off what Beatrice was saying. Part of what really struck me about what she just said, and what she always talks about in such a visionary way, is what does it look like to build a community where we're really centering what care is and how we care for each other and how we show up for each other, and how do we resource that in a way that makes our communities thrive. And it's central to the work that she's doing. And it's also central to the work that my team is working on, which is building a care infrastructure and investing in it so that we can be there when our families need us. And just today, we actually had a big victory because the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act. This is a really necessary and completely ridiculous that we don't already have it. Law that will allow for accommodations for pregnant workers for things like a stool to sit on if your doctor says you need it, an extra bathroom break, extra water if you need it. So that bill has passed the House today in a bipartisan way, which is fantastic. It goes to the Senate, where we are very hopeful that it will pass there. But that is really, it's really about being, care. It's about building a care infrastructure in a lot of different ways. And I think we're seeing a lot of progress on that front and in various areas, and it's inspiring.
So inspiring. We're going to move to the next big section of our agenda. It's on change. We have the hope. We're using the hope to fuel the change. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into the areas that people have lifted for policy change, bringing them hope. And so, Tina Sherman, we're going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what's in the Momnibus that just passed the House? Hello, thanks to a lot of people raising their voices, making calls, organizing, and other important legislation that's moving that will address the maternal health crisis and save the lives of moms and babies. What's going on? What change is happening and still needs to happen?
Thanks, Kristen. I want to start out by sharing with folks that right now, American women are more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than women in other countries. And this is shameful. Other countries like the United Kingdom, Libya, and Kazakhstan. We're the only industrialized nation to experience an increase in maternal mortality over the last 2 decades, with the highest maternal mortality ratio being among the wealthiest nations of the world. And this data is independent of parity, age, or education, and has remained unchanged since 1915. And Black women are 3 to 4 more times, I'm going to say that again, 3 to 4 more times likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. We know that right now, we are the most dangerous place to give birth in the developed world. And the Momnibus is a historic piece of legislation that is just one of the key pieces of legislation that could really help to move the needle. 60% of maternal deaths can be prevented. It could be completely eliminated and infant mortality reduced just simply with policies and cultural competent care. When we're talking these policies, the Momnibus covers in its 12 bills, several of them, and I'll just go over a couple. Making critical investments in the social determinants of health that influence maternal health health outcomes like housing, transportation, and nutrition. Of course, we spoke about earlier our win of one of the bills that for a comprehensive study that of the unique maternal health risks facing veterans and invest in the Veterans Maternity Care Coordination, and also investing in maternal mental health care and substance use disorder treatments, along with investing in community-based organizations working to improve maternal health outcomes, particularly for Black women. So the Momnibus is really one of several collection of bills that could really help move the needle and address the maternal health crisis.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ruth, you are next up. What hope is fueling the change that's happening with paid leave right now? And what can we do to make sure that we actually really truly win paid leave nationally this year? What's going on?
I am so glad you asked that question. It is obviously one of my very favorite things to talk about. Similar to the shocking stats that Tina just shared, the United States remains the only industrialized and one of only 2 countries in the entire world with 0 weeks of paid leave. But we are about to change that. So, this pandemic has just laid bare the fact that our care infrastructure is pretty shoddy. If we had had paid family and medical leave ahead of the pandemic, we would be in a better space right now. Access to paid leave, access to paid sick days helps reduce the spread of the flu. It also helps flatten the curve, keep people in the jobs they need, and make sure that people can be there for their family when they need it. This is where I like to just take a second and ask everyone to just think about a time that you've needed time away from work to care for someone who is meaningful to you, a loved one in your family. Maybe it was a new child. Maybe you needed to take time for yourself for your own serious medical issue. Or maybe you're like me and you're in the sandwich generation and you needed time away from work to help take care of an aging parent. Regardless of the scenario you imagine, I know that every single person listening right now can think of a time that they've needed paid leave. And the good news is that we are going to win it. We have made massive strides over the last several years and even more gigantic strides in just the last couple of months. The Biden-Harris administration has put forward a comprehensive paid family and medical leave proposal as part of the American Families and Jobs Plan. And it is very strong, and we can win as long as we put pressure on Congress to do what Congress needs to do. And the best way that we can do that is to share our own stories and experiences with needing leave as a way to help further normalize the fact that this is not an epidemic of personal failings. It's a systems flaw, and we can fix system flaws. So when you talk about your need for leave and you talk about your caregiving story and you share it with your friends and your family, and then you take it to your members of Congress, that creates the pressure that we are going to need to really lean into over the next few weeks. And if we get this done, we can win paid leave this year.
Thank you, Ruth. Next up, we have Beatrice Beckford, who is talking about change and what's happening now with youth and family justice campaigns. Where is change in motion? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so much of our youth and family justice campaigns encompasses a whole lot of things. And much of the issues intersect with a lot of our other campaign issues in the same way we talked about building the care infrastructure for our communities and our nation ultimately helps to end the criminalizing in communities. When we're investing in care, we're automatically divesting from criminalization. And so that includes in our school to prison pipeline campaigns, where we're looking at ending the use of suspensions and other practices that push kids out of the classroom when they really need to be in the classroom, getting the supports they need, irregardless of whether they are behavioral supports, academic supports, and broader social emotional learning supports. So we're continuing to push for suspension bans in school districts across the country and ensuring that schools are investing in social emotional learning and other supports that students need. This also includes our campaign to end the use of law enforcement, all law enforcement, including ICE, in our school buildings. Police do not have a place in schools. And there are professionals who are better equipped to support children when behavior issues arise. And so we're working with organizations across the country, including our partners at Dignity in Schools, to end the use of law enforcement in school buildings. And we're also pushing for the Counseling Not Criminalization Act at the federal level to really end the use of federal dollars being used to fund policing in schools when they could be better investing in other things that both schools need. We know that schools are oftentimes having to make cuts. I mean, even as a child, I could remember conversations about school budgets being cut, not having to share, textbooks and things of that nature. And these are the types of decisions that schools shouldn't have to make, whether to fund a police officer in the school building or to fund a nurse. And too often they're having to do that. And so we're continuing to push for police-free schools, for schools to be investing in social emotional learning. And that includes counselors, nurses, and social workers, because we know that there are a significant number of school districts that have more police in schools than they have nurses and social workers. And ultimately that shows our young people and our families what we're willing to invest in, which is criminalizing, right, as opposed to their well-being and their capacity to thrive and be fully invested in as people who matter in our communities and in our lives. And it also includes our youth incarceration work. So we're leading youth prison closure campaigns and supporting partners in Maine, in Virginia, in New Jersey, with the New Jersey Social Justice Institute, doing some incredible work there. And in Maine, we're actually getting close following the leadership of Maine Youth Justice to close the facility there. And so continue to support these organizations who are our dear partners in closing these youth prisons, because prisons are no place for kids. And any country that feels as though it's okay to put babies in jails is got some serious soul searching to do. And it takes all of us to shift that practice and to end the practice of putting children behind bars. This also includes our work to support defund campaigns across the country. And while defund has been a narrative that's been around for generations, and sometimes people get a little caught up on the language of defund, when we're saying defund, ultimately what we're meaning is invest in communities, right? And what communities need for care infrastructure, what schools need, what communities need back to mental health services, services for pregnant and birthing people, reproductive justice and initiatives like that, all the things that we know that people need in their daily lives. Support those things, affordable housing, access to safe, affordable housing, right? All these things that communities need, but are too often left off of the table for negotiation because funds are poured into and too often rubber stamped into budgets to support expanding police forces that are oftentimes deeply militarized and not trained to support communities in the way that they need to be supported. And so we're doing an incredible amount of work to address this issue of criminalizing of families and caregivers and parents and young people. And so there's a lot of work that's moving there that's exciting and needs all of us, right? We need all of us to win these campaigns. And when we're advocating for paid family leave, when we're advocating for, tax and budget supports that really are centering families, when we're investing in maternal health and maternal justice and rights for immigration, we are collectively working to end the criminalization of our families and communities. And so our youth and family justice campaigns seek to do that, right? To end criminalization and invest in care on what people need.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have Alyssa Schmier. And Alyssa, following what Beatrice was just saying about the importance of investing in communities and divesting from harmful carceral systems, what should everyone know about how budgets are moral documents and the power of budgets at the city, state, and federal level, and especially including the national budget? Can you share a little bit about how taxes and budgets impact every issue area? Thank you.
Yeah, I think B kind of got at the point perfectly. And we're seeing this moment where people are kind of beginning to really understand how the budgets, which seems like a very wonky, pretty boring issue, is actually the engine that kind of drives a lot of these policies that we either really love and really need and want to invest in, or policies that are harmful to many communities in this country. And I think that we see the values of leaders, of our nation, of voters carried out through the budget system. It's not exactly where you think that might be, but where we put our money as a country, which is really how we carry out, I would say, like 90% of the public policies we have in this country, really matters. And so if you take the example of, police forces and kind of the militarization of the police, that is such a gigantic part of budgets, especially at the state and local level, when you compare it to something like free school meals or after school snacks or funding for mental health professionals in the school systems. And so I think what we're seeing at this moment, especially after the marches of last summer led by Black and brown people, is that we're trying to see some sort of readjusting, evening out in some places, defunding in other places, this reimagining of what our value system is and putting our money where our values are. And that carries through all the way to the tax system. This is a country that undervalues women and working families and people of color for decades, if not centuries. And our tax code has 100% reflected on that we give the biggest cuts and the biggest results of our tax code to the uber wealthy. Like I'm talking about like the 0.01% of the nation and these mega corporations, and the people who are kind of left out are women, especially women of color. And so that's something that we're trying to readjust with new policies. I think that you don't always think of these things as like value systems, but 100% it is. If we care about these communities, if we value the work of women, of caretaking, if we are true in our desire to create a more equitable world and society, then our policies will be funded in a way that reflects that.
Thank you, Alyssa. Next up, we have Donna Norton. Why is creating a pathway to citizenship part of building a strong care infrastructure? How do we move from hope to change in this area?
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's an important question right now, because that is a conversation we're trying to have with Congress, who are looking at a new infrastructure bill, and we're arguing, care infrastructure has to be a big part of that. And there are some members of Congress that are saying, well, immigration reform is not part of that equation. And we're arguing, yes, absolutely, immigration reform and creating a path to citizenship is part of creating a strong care infrastructure. We know, as I mentioned, that COVID really showed that we rely on our immigrant family members, our immigrant caregivers, our immigrant farmers to keep our economy running, and our healthcare systems, our childcare systems running. For example, immigrants are 28% of our physicians and 30% of our home health aides. My own mom was my caregiver growing up, and when she went into, had a stroke and had a coma, sadly, every single one of her caregivers were immigrants. So I personally have experienced this. And so we really need these skills and the contributions of immigrants to keep our care infrastructure going. And we also know without a path to citizenship, we're not going to create good jobs in the care economy, which really has a workforce that's dominated by women. So, that's why America's Moms really support a clear path to citizenship for essential workers, for dreamers, for TPS holders. We really know that immigrants make our country stronger and more prosperous.
Thank you, Donna. We've covered our hope. We've talked about some of the changes that we seek. Now let's quickly touch on igniting effective action. Moms Rising wins a lot of battles at the state level, at the city level, and at the national level. And all of you have led on campaigns that have had victories, often against all odds. What tips do you have for people on how each of your campaigns can be lifted by people who are watching, listening, participating around the country right now on how to be the most effective activists? What thoughts do you have for people who are saying, how can I do more or be more effective in the little time I have to take on activism in my daily life, along with everything else I'm doing? I'm going to start out with Beatrice Beckford. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I mean, we're all trying to figure out how to fit things in. And I think sometimes that feels like we have to add stuff to our plate, but we don't. I think some of the best ways that we can figure out how to participate in these campaigns and on these issues that are deeply important to us is by pulling in our own folks. So tell a friend to tell a friend, and use the tools and resources that these campaigns are leveraging through petitions and story collecting efforts in your own community with your own families, because some of the most powerful political homes are our actual homes. And so I'd say mobilize your folks, organize your folks, and connect to organizations like Moms Rising and many of our partners who are going to be popping in throughout this event, and pull in your people, because they're impacted, and you can be a leader amongst them.
Thank you. Next up, we have Ruth Martin. Your tips for being highly effective.
We're stronger together. I mean, at Moms Rising, we often lift up the Audre Lorde quote about how we don't lead single issue lives. We're a multi-issue organization. We've, implicitly linked all of the issues today that we've talked about and how they tie into each other. So I think it's really important to think about how everything intersects and think about who's missing and who's not at the table and who needs to be there, because we will be stronger when we are standing shoulder to shoulder with each other and building those alliances. And it's harder to knock a bunch of us down when we're standing up together and linking arms with each other, shoulder to shoulder, connecting us all. We can radically change these systems that are not working for us if we do it together and don't allow ourselves to find ourselves in a situation where people who would really like to hold on to power are telling us we have to choose who gets to go next, what gets to happen next, what order are we going to do things in. I think we can just reject that and build the world we want to see.
I love that. I've been thinking this year of all years, we need to create a t-shirt, leave no polis behind. We can do multiple things at the same time. Which brings us to Tina Sherman. What tips do you have?
I am going to go with share your story, because I'm looking at all of our faces on the screen and thinking Congress doesn't look like this. Doesn't look like everyone who's a part of this event, and it should. But until it does, Congress needs to hear our stories and hear what real life families are going through every day. And it is only with those stories that we can impact change. So tell your story. Tell your story to your member of Congress. Tell your story to your state House representative. And no matter how little, it is important and it is key to change.
Thank you. Next up, we have Donna Norton with top tips, tactics for making big change.
I'd say just know your power, and that when we make a lot of noise, we can have a big impact. I always think back on our campaign to save the Affordable Care Act under President Trump and a full Republican Congress that had voted dozens of times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And by everyone going out and sharing their stories and going to town halls and sending in petitions and calling their members of Congress, we managed to fight back the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, which is just an amazing achievement when you think back on it. But it really shows that we do have the power. And when we really, throw all our energies and join forces and lift our voices, we can move mountains.
So true. Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have Alyssa Schmier. Top tips, tactics that you've seen make change.
What everyone said is really important. I would say, in addition to sharing your story, is you don't need on the issue. You're the expert in your life and your family. And I think that many times politicians, especially traditionally men, have made these policies needlessly difficult to understand, and they use certain types of language and certain types of words to other you and make you think like, oh, I can't speak on tax policy, anything about corporate tax policy. But the fact of the matter is you know what fairness looks like and unfairness looks like because you teach it to your kids every single day, and you know when you're screwed and when you're not. And so I think that, by coupling that with your story of saying like, listen, I can't afford, dinner at the end of the month to feed my family of 4 because this policy is not working for me. And so you could use whatever type of difficult, fancy language that you have, but I know what the real world results of that looks like and how hard it is for me to pay my rent and that I can't fix the tires on my car to get to work and so on and so forth. And we've seen time and time again that when you lead with the expertise of your own life and your own family and knowing what's going on in your community, that you break down that language and members of Congress, council members, mayors, they start to actually listen because they know that they haven't fooled you. They haven't talked over your head, that type of thing. So I think, leading with your story and your expertise of life and, a little bit of that bravery that it takes to kind of confront the system will get you very far.
Thank you. And thank you to every single luminary leader from Moms Rising, Mamas con Poder, who has joined us: Beatrice Beckford, Ruth Martin, Tina Sherman, Donna Norton, Alyssa Schmier. And I also want to thank all of the over 1 million Moms Rising members in every state in the nation who are raising their voices every day, reaching out to Congress and state and city legislators, making calls and making changes. Now, as we as a nation stand at a decision point, the pandemic has spotlighted the faults in our national structures and systems that were there long before the pandemic and will last long after every person is vaccinated if we don't step forward, fully push for the transformative change we need. And as we stand at this national decision point, we are doubling down at Moms Rising. We are inviting you to double down with us. Momentum building. Long needed systemic changes in our nation. We see it in the amount of people who turned out to vote and in the amount of people who volunteered out the vote. We see it in the fact that over 234,000 members of Moms Rising reached out to Congress to just simply help pass the American Rescue Plan. We see it in the stories of members by you each day and the changes that are happening. Our country has yet completely failed to do what most other industrialists take for granted: build care infrastructure. It includes universal child care, paid leave for all, access to home and community-based services for people with disabilities and the aging, living wages, a permanent child tax, health care for everyone, justice for all, a path to citizenship for essential and care workers, dreamers, and TPS holders, a fair tax code to help pay for these infrastructure investments, and investing in communities in reimagining safety by divesting from punishment and pollution. Together, we are unstoppable in making the transformational changes in the nation. We invite you to join us. Text MOMS, M-O-M-S, at 747-464 to join us on the front lines. You don't have to be a mom. You just have to have some point in your life known a mom. So text MOMS at 747-464 to join us on the front lines. Thank you for joining us now.
We're not meant to be apart. It was hard. But we stayed safe and distant to protect those that we love most. and even those we've never met. To protect our most vulnerable. To remember that care is a big word. It feels good to take the necessary steps to reunite. It feels better than good. We stayed apart because we love each other. When we come together, there's nothing we can't do.